Thank you. Thank you, General President, and again for the having this session. But I wonder whether I am little straying away from the topic a bit. But I'm putting on the blue economy and then bringing the express pearl, and more so showing the opportunity for the Sri Lankan science and what we should be doing with respect to sea. Right. We speak from a country that is 25th, the largest island in the world. So the Sri Lanka is its very 25th position in the globe. And it's a nice one, easy to remember. But Marco Polo said that we are the world's best or the most beautiful island of this size, which was also stated for the University of Peradeniya in some way, the most beautiful campus of that size in the world. So impact of maritime disasters on potential to accrue benefits through blue economy. The issue of disasters impacting the economy. The point of having disasters without having an economy is even worse, and that is one of the problems that we are seeing. We really feel it, but on the other hand, our opportunity space is very high. 1,785 is our coastline. When you take the small islands also into the equation, not just Sri Lanka's island, we have also small islands, and those coastline can also be calculated. And then 8 times, as Professor Devaka mentioned, we have this enormous space out there, which sometimes we forget that when we are most of the planning, national planning, we are looking at most of the time what's on land. We believe in this terrestrial existence part, but we forget the ocean potential. So with that, the blue economy, the topic given was in the impact on that. Again, as I said, we have not really latched on to the concept, but this is really being discussed. We have the IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, part of we are also there. And so everybody have now this time defining blue economy and an opportunity to use. If I take the World Wildlife, the definition, blue economy means the use of sea and its resources for sustainable economic development. And the word sustainable is important because most of the time, this concept of sustainable in the blue economy is not there. It's just use of ocean resources and so on. There is not a question of sustainable. And maybe sometimes it looks like that we have now exhausted the opportunity on the brown side on the land, and let's get onto the sea and start exploiting that. So that should not be the real way forward. And that's why the stress that I've actually taken the WWF one. So the blue economy in a sustainable sense, the opportunity actually seriously exists doing that. So for others, as is mentioned, it simply refers to any economic activity in the maritime sector, whether sustainable or not, and most of the time not, right? So we really, if we are looking at, we must understand the importance of preserving this asset and utilizing the asset, and how do we really use it for our benefit and without really compromising the use in the future. So this understanding has to be there. Professor Prashanthi showed this. WWF's comment is that if the ocean, it's actually the assessment, but a country, it would have 7th largest economy in the world. However, I would end up with showing a significant potential because it's science that throws light on these opportunities. And when you really calculate in a very simple way in these valuations, you probably can see an enormous cost opportunity. And I'll just stop with that in the last slide. So potentially, once you have a coastline and once you have this space out there in the ocean, more ocean space than land space, what are we doing? Of course, within the meaning of sustainable, I'm not really saying going over and then exploit it to the fullest, right? So this shows the even in a current context how much an enormous impact it's contributing from the economic sense to the world. And we should understand, and there's so much of perhaps unknown amounts of opportunities that lie within, and when you understand various connections and so on the network. So for us at this stage, we may be doing fishing, the stilt fishing, very good tourist attraction. You have valuations, probably the hotels earns more than the fishermen for sure. The picture gives them much more income than the fishermen on the stilt, right? And coastal tourism, then the aquaculture and yachting and so on. It's the last one is actually now in our national economic export plan also to have a specific segment on it. So but then it's almost like, okay, you walk into the place, you capture the essence of it, and then more and more usage to be driven. And then it kind of will end up in an unsustainable territory for sure, right? We will just consume and not for the sake of the value that it gives. Anyway, so let's look at it. You can do these maritime trackers, and they show the ships going around. And Sri Lanka definitely demonstrate the kind of like the central point, that geologic position that we have been blessed with, the east-west roost, and so rich in numbers. We can watch whether the Chinese ship is bringing the fertilizer where it is now. Now the modern technology allows you to get to the essence of, I mean, like you can track, right? So when you track, you find that even though 600 ships around goes from this east-west route per day, Sri Lanka probably gets around 12 ships coming into the harbor per day, right? It's that time. So that's an enormous opportunity that we see. Why not all of them calling in for disposal of their waste, taking the water, putting the bunk oil? We still have not been able to divert much of the traffic to come to our ports, even though we have the one of the best deep draft harbors in the but so far it's not has happened. But all this the usage is demonstrate an economy in action. This economy in action, now this is blue economy in a sense, because we are using the space for the maritime transport and the goods and services produced on land and the exchange across the world. And it's seriously significant activity. And as the numbers grow, as again in the very beginning, Professor Devaka mentioned, the more activity, the more traffic, more chances of these accidents. And so we have to understand this potential. So and it was neatly demonstrated, perhaps in another incident happened a little earlier, is the ship Ever Given, that, I mean, it looks almost like a toy ship and a toy kind of like the thing, but this is the Suez Canal. And the dusty condition and the wind at that particular time, and one of the largest container ships, I think this was the third or the fourth one, and just swung across and blocked the canal, right? What was interesting was the economic assessment on that, and the economic assessment was coming about $9.8 billion per day. The ship swinging like this and stopping the traffic, $9.8 billion. And you extrapolate that with the knowledge that we have about our national performance per year. Our national performance on exports is about $11 billion. So 1 day of Suez Canal blockage is almost like 1 year of our hard activity, right? So it, in a sense, shows that how much of a small economy that we are running, right? Now that gives us, and also it demonstrates what's the impact of a scenario like that, a ship just blocking the canal, right? Otherwise, it has to go around the African coast and come through the Cape of Good Hope and around that, and it's enormous cost. So they cut the canal, and now people are happily using that to get an economic edge. So this is the typical economy that's in action today, and that's what we see. And when that ship happens to block that canal, our fuel prices also went up. I mean, we face problems with our fuel prices also, right? So the repercussions are across the world. So you can see the maritime incident, accident, a disaster, or whatever are going to have serious repercussions anyway across any activity that we are so far doing, because they're all interconnected. And this interconnectivity, the issues are going to be felt all over the place. So what we should understand is this, the brown linear economy that we are doing, right? So an example of an industrial accident, or rather one of the world's worst from a textile sector. Now this happened on the Rana Plaza in 2001-3. 1,000 odd people immediately died, right? They perished because of all the illegal activities in Bangladesh on that particular point. And this is for what? Right? And they had the meteoric rise in the textile sector. And we have this very, so unfortunate, but a picture that what kind of went viral on that incident is, it's all trying to meet deadlines. It's all trying to not to miss the ship. But otherwise, if you miss the ship, you have to get onto the airplane, and then it's a double the cost, right? Air cargo is multiples of the maritime, shipping. And you see this enormous pressure of an unsustainable economic condition, I mean, like the way that we are drawing. So probably we need realignment, but of course we see the situation of Bangladesh having developed into that situation with whatever the means and so on, is also now giving us money, right? From the typical economic sense, they are in a now position, after starting much later than us, in a position to give us loans rather than the other way. Anyway, but this is an economy condition that we are now used to, but it's so unfortunate. I mean, this is why we should not forget the fact, how do we align our development and our aspirations to ensure this sustainability concept, right? We don't put things under pressure, and we do not exploit so much. And that needs a lot of things to be recalibrated and realigned. Hope, I mean, if you have to move forward, but something to remember, I just want to show the economic condition. So what lessons we can take? So come May 20th, Professor Turney showed the immediate pictures because they were there to see that. We have copied the pictures, right? And the lessons to be taken. I just want to highlight on even the Express Pearl, and then relating that, how can we do things differently? That's the objective, hopefully, and with science in good use. Now, I want you to focus on these two pictures. Just imagine, right? In the left is Express Godavari coming from the same ship company, and on the other side is the Express Pearl. You see a white cloud on one side and the brownish cloud of nitrogen dioxide on the other one. Now, how did these two stories ended? From the same company, two ships, how did they end? One happened on 2020th, and the other one, of course, we know the May 20th, 2021. And in this first case, the ship's crew, the captain, noticed this white cloud, and they knew exactly that, okay, as per the Bay plan and so on, there's a lithium container out there, the battery container, and the white cloud was noted, and they took rapid action. There was the Indian Coast Guard, fought the fire or this issue, and it kind of ended up in this situation of coming to the port and then removing the container, and off they went out of the harbor and back into the stream. So the point of where the cargo lies and the noticing the fact, of course, these are very important, kind of like a dangerous cargo on board, on deck. And just imagine below deck, if it's not noted and all that. So we have, with Express Pearl, we have scenarios like, okay, why all the carbon dioxide was used, and the below deck fire. And when suddenly again fire started, they had no other carbon dioxide available and calling for the help. But here it was interestingly understood and acted, and then managed, and then called in at the harbor, removed the container and left. Now, perhaps if you are a Sri Lankan, I mean, we have aspiration for hub status and so on. I think there is an interesting case for Dr. Malk, maybe more proficient on this to tell, but the port of refuge concept. The port of refuge concept, I think there are two cases of ships earlier, and definitely Express Pearl is going to be a case study in itself. Why multiple harbors turned away, and this service was not offered to the Sri Lanka, or rather the ship, not Sri Lanka, but the ship that, coming from the ship owner itself, okay, don't go back to Jabal Ali and put the cargo back, asked to move just forward, and then getting to the Qatari harbor, and then to the Indian harbor, and then called into the Sri Lankan harbor. And then it was almost like way too gone to react, or maybe. So this case shows Express Godavari that these are possible, right? Only thing is, a port of refuge is still not an international convention, and probably you have to make a last call and then take the support, whereas you are not bound, or you are not mandatorily give it. So maybe in time to come, we should push, or something like this, that port of refuge has to be an important element, because when you know all the dangerous cargo usually goes through the shipping lines, not through air, right? So what you notice from the container ships is there are about 8 fires on containers every week is reported in one way or the other, right? The numbers are going to go only, not going to come down if we follow the same practices that we are doing. So this case, that that smoke was handled and then a satisfactory conclusion. Whereas on the other one, on the nitrogen dioxide, it ended up being not just Sri Lanka's the worst maritime disaster. Of course, it's Sri Lanka's worst maritime, but we say this as the world's worst HNS related disaster, and coupled with the plastic noodles on board is a complex, definitely the worst disaster from that chemical point of view. And I mean, but however, because of these mistakes, or rather the lack of support, Express Pearl going from one harbor to the other, and the captains or the whoever was not really understanding the enormous impacts that can have on the down the line, neglecting that part, and we had to face a serious environmental disaster. So, so May 20th, this started, and of course today it's sunk, but we call it, it's still a live event, active pollution, till the completion of the wreck management, not only the wreck management of the shipwreck itself, but also the rest of the cargo that is scattered, about 400 to 500 containers across. And as we speak today, it probably we are heading for the 200 days in action of this pollution episode. So it's about 195 days to date, right? So it's significant and it's continuingly polluting. The shipwreck itself is a significant polluter. Forget the cargo, the ship itself is pollution. It's, I mean, like significant. So we had to understand this, and it's, you know, I mean, I like to think it's like taking the entire periodic table and you are just sinking it off Colombo Harbor, right? I mean, you look at the cargo, it's almost everything's there. Only two items were not really there, the explosives and the radioactive material. And there may be a question mark on the second, right? So this is the situation. And why? It's because another code is not mandatory. So Express Pearl became a major problem to Sri Lanka because of this port of refuge was not responded or respected. And captains mistakenly not really responding or understanding the gravity of it. Container ships are not really seriously trained on container ships, maybe not really seriously trained on dangerous cargo. It's additional training. And this on a maritime magazine, it's really indicated it was a fault of just lashing on the nitric acid, right? It's very clearly demonstrated that your cargo caused an economic and environmental disaster is just not preventing this aspect of really putting it on properly on hold. And that simple mistake. And the mistake comes from not adhering to the CTU cargo code, cargo transport unit code. And again, this is not a mandatory item, right? So only 10% of it probably says in the maritime discussions says that they adhere to that. So 90% is just followed, and you don't follow that as a mandatory practice. And that can lead, and Express Pearl is again probably a case study in itself about not adhering to the CTU code. And when you ignore these things, how the shipper and the captain and this transfer of cargo is not adhered, you pay a supreme price. This is this example, because we had only one nitric acid container of 28 metric tons in this ship. And that was the starting point for all that, as far as for the moment in the hype, what we know and come to understand. So it's nice. So why I said is like, if you take this example of Stolt Rotterdam, which is a chemical carrier. So there are the ship's captains are given definitely and a different training, and they are much more versatile, well-versed on this aspect. And this was pure nitric acid container here, right? 28,000 metric tons. And what was followed in that was given the warnings, like when it happened on the River Rhine, given the warning to even the nearby township that the nitrogen dioxide, the plume can come to the gland, and then you have to be evacuated, and such warnings were given. But in our scenario, there was no warning to the land side people. The only warning given to the ship party was to the ships passing by the side, the plume can go in, though the monsoonal winds was on the land direction. But the ITOF warning was on the risk side, was to about ships passing on the area, right? That please avoid 5 kilometer distances. And this because of the lethal concentrations of nitrogen dioxide or this higher concentration of nitrogen dioxide is possible. So the risk connection was done. So it's interesting. Again, a communication part, knowing exactly the challenges that are involved, we need to go up in this form of communication as well. But we also understand that if somebody says to evacuate from houses and so on, what a scenario would be, right? It's like cooking without gas, scenario that we are now seeing. Okay, so Stolt Rotterdam is an example where we can learn from. And following this example, we have asked for not just study when the ship was taken out. Professor Turney mentioned a couple of things to be done, but we have added another list. We have added to take steel samples and all that from the hash covers, for metallurgical analysis, because that also gives a good understanding of what went wrong. And it was very interesting in this ship. This is a fully big chemical carrier, but the fire happened from nitric acid was simply by a leaking valve and touching furniture, some piece of furniture, right? Because nitric acid is not flammable. Nitric acid is not, it's inflammable, but it had gone into the exothermic reaction once it had organic material and would just get in touch into some furniture. And some of these containers do have that furniture, wooden base as available. So it's interesting when you look at the root cause, what possibilities are there. So if you are not fully versed with the potential implications, the end result is a much more of a higher disaster than what it should have been. What it should be. So again, Sri Lanka responded very well. Sri Lankan harbor never resisted. Immediately after the Express Pearl, there was an issue with a Liberian tank vessel, it's a registered vessel, carrying a cargo where they observed a fire and they asked help from the Colombo harbor. And when the ship was allowed to come into the Colombo harbor, that container was removed and the ship then went away. So Sri Lankan harbor, even with the Express Pearl, here is an example after that, responding very positively to a ship in distress and supporting. So unfortunately, Express Pearl didn't get that support from the Qatari harbor, nor the Jabal Ali to return, nor the Indian harbor. So significant drivers of degradation, you can think, I'm not in looking at details. So all these activities that we do, remember we talked of blue economy as losing the sea and its potential. And all these things lead to significant issues. Now, Express Pearl has curtailed consumption of fish in some ways, because when we speak of this chemical X was there, this chemical Y was there, people do not want to eat fish, right? And we may have stayed away from fish, and this is the main point. And because of the hazards around, we have still a no fishing zone from Panadura to the Maoya. There's an area that's still being banned for fishing. So you have these examples of suddenly some event is really causing so much of impact or effects down the line, right? That's a big one event, what happened, and we call it one of the most significant or the biggest disasters, right? But all the other things also slowly contribute to this degradation of the marine system, and we must be aware of it. And that's important for us into planning to getting this. If you're talking about sustainable blue economy, we have to be quite aware and conversant with the possibilities. It's like the nitrogen, right? And Professor Prashant showed the calculation of nitrogen, and Sri Lanka has now witnessing a dead zone in the Bay of Bengal, which is almost equivalent to it's the most recently identified the anoxic zone, and about 60,000 square kilometers of an anoxic zone in the Bay of Bengal. So that means that type of nitrogen now we put in is going to have even much more of an impact, because a system that is in the last legs of survival, it's going to be burdened with much more material and going to have a much more tough of a pollution episode, right? So we need to understand even simple things as that urea, even though it's not called dangerous cargo, that urea is having a long-term impact on the system because of the direct release of nitrogen that was shown by Professor Prashant in that economic calculation. So these pictures quite clear that the disruption is very much high. So like the foregoing, the opportunities in the vacation time, the relaxation, etc., to the loss of lives from the innocent wildlife, And some critical species. We know that 5 out of the 7 turtle species come to the shores, and all of them are on the endangered or that list. And so these are these are scenarios. But what is the national economic impact? Now, Sri Lanka is not engaged in actually calculating an economic value for the blue economy, or rather the current contributions. Of course, they compartmentalize into the various, let's say, fishing and so on, and put in tourism and so on. But we have not, from the maritime zone on the activities, we do not have an economic valuation. Again, from the logistics side, we know that is a significant GDP contribution, right? It's one of the top 1 or the 2 contribution in the logistics side. So that means the transport side. And we have one of the top harbors. Yet we have not focused, is lump them together and seen the compartments and not assessed. But there's so much of other potential. That's what I just want to highlight, right? So the economic action from that type of list that I gave can turn into marine mineral prospecting, right? The magnesium nodules and so on that we have been that a lot of world is listening to. And there's a dream in India about getting the clathrates, the methane out. Year 3000, they dream of powering India through that type of scenario. And then blue biotechnology, the seabed mining is connected, and then ocean renewable energy and marine aquatic production. So you can go on adding some different areas for better economic value added activities. I'll take one like the aquaculture. I'll take actually 2, right? Now, this is an industry that has been there, but in a very highly polluting sense, bridging the sea and the rivers and its brackish zone. But we have been really looking at getting the production, and our season to another season, sometimes we enjoy the fruits of one season and then suffer in another season. We have the white spot disease, and then the waste is all there. Lots of antibiotics have been used, and the sediments are very toxic from these farms, right? So we have been really extracting. We are running an extractive economy, not what is called a supportive thing. We are not really responsible for some of the output, the pollutants. And as long as we get the profits and the cash flow, we have been happy. Yet, the aquaculture contribution to the Sri Lankan economy is in decimal point, right? It's not making significant. Countries that have started similar to Sri Lanka, like Vietnam and Indonesia and so on, and moved into the digit and even double, like in that order of magnitude. So we are not using science, right? So, and that is the way you add value, but you try to reduce the quantities. So make it more sustainable and go up in value chain. That's probably a better way. So when you take an annual prawn and crab production, like 25,000 metric tons in Sri Lanka, there's about 50 to 70% of that weight of raw material goes to waste, right? But we lose a lot of things because there's a polysaccharides of value, the chitin, chitosan story. And so I almost believe the prawn shell is of more value than the prawn, because there's so much of nanotechnology and all those stuff being used, demonstrated by science. There's significant value. At the moment, that is just loss. And we have seen examples of people just spending money to dump the waste on the ocean, right? You just spend, put it in the boat, go and dump in the ocean. That's what sometimes it's happening. So this opportunity, how do you realize the opportunity? Using knowledge, right? If you take arthritic drug like the glucosamine and so on at the very end, they come from this same waste, the prawn shell waste and the crab shell waste, the crustaceans. There's so much opportunity space, and again, like the nanomaterials that are can potentially be produced. So what I would say is the blue economy should be put into a different way, where there's no such waste, and we don't look at just single exploitation of a raw material and only that quantity matters. Try to look at more holistically, more sustainable. We know this is the ocean of decade for the ocean sciences, the oceans that we want. This is the UN decade for oceans. And the reason why, because we say that plastics are going to be there more in the ocean than fish in 2045. That's a quantitative calculation. It's not a qualitative calculation statement, right? So the point is, how do we do sustainably and then yet try to not to lower our quality of life and carry on with what we are doing? So these opportunities. Again, if you take the seaweed in Sri Lanka, it's sometimes interesting that we really don't get funding and support, just not going beyond to the really where the value addition should happen. We get on gender and we get on social aspect, but we stopped really adding significant value. The science is not utilized. So it's an example of seaweed in Sri Lanka, right? We worked on this for livelihood option on marginal areas like in Mana, and in the sense of for economic upliftment at a local level, and that was the objective. But the point is, if you take, I think Sri Lanka has about 570 plus types of seaweeds and so on, and one of the things that was worked on, you can see the seaweed industry extraction onto this, like carrageenan. This is in the food industry, about 200 odd products can come from this red seaweed extract. And this is about US $1 million up 2021. We're talking about 600 million US dollar industry. 200 products can come from this. And where do we stop? It's the point is we just stopped at the seaweed level, and we collect that and then sell it. And that, if you want to survive on that, you will be going for mass scale extraction, and the more you have to take in to get some marginal returns. But if you don't do that, you go on to the seaweeds, to extraction and fractionation and novel biological compounds, there's so much of opportunity. And then your economy or the social condition can be transformed by putting knowledge on the ground. We need to put knowledge on the ground to see, okay, this is not a collection of seaweed and just a livelihood opportunity. You can do more. Sri Lanka brings things, extracts from, like in France, to add to perfumery in Sri Lanka. And we bring the most expensive item from outside and so on. So it's something that you need to change, right? To really understand the benefit. So situations like for food health, beauty, animal health, agriculture, so much are possible in this spectrum. So we really need to work on the understand, and that is where the science is important. And I suppose we must push the knowledge and say, look, we should not just think in a very short-sighted way of just becoming day-to-day living is not what we should be, and add value and then put in more science in. So for example, recently an Australian research came with adding red seaweed to cow feed could cut bovine flatulence. And you know what that means? Methane. And then people are desperate to find in countries like in India and so on, because of the cattle population, the methane is getting added, climate change is taking place. Here one interesting natural solution had been found, right? You work on these things, and there's an onus of scientists. Like one of the things that showed in even Express Pearl is how we are not coming together to study in this opportunity, because Express Pearl gave a fantastic opportunity to come in and use your area of expertise and see what is going on here. As I said, on isotopes and the radio nuclear side, we don't yet have an answer, right? There are so much of questions that could be answered in support of our calculations and so on, if some of the science and the institutions come together. Because this is a one, in a sense, an opportunity. Okay, it's a disaster, but you should never let a disaster be another disaster by forgetting, and I'll also conclude with that. So these are examples by researchers rising up to the occasion, and I see this with, this is a collection that is developed at Dr. Tilni Aryadas's on the lab, right? And on working on astaxanthin. And that's again another extracts of much higher value, right? So it comes to the potential there is about another 800 million US dollars, the current market price, but this is supposed to be getting much more exponentially high with time. So again, we need a roadmap for the blue economy to develop. I mean, that is what is important. It should not be swayed from one event to another. If we have a situation, we should understand where we went wrong and work on it. Like Express Pearl, I said, as a hub, we should then work on getting, now MIPA is trying on the nurdles to become a high pollutant category in the world, because plastic nurdles we know can now be quite significant, including recent research on finding on human placenta, the microplastics and the nanoplastic. So that means they are migrating, as we know, 500 years of life on after getting disposed. So the Sri Lankan effort on putting that on the list of IMOs, IMO with support. So something again we should do, maybe CTU code, port of refuge, make it an international case for that these things should not happen like this, and there should be much more responsible way. Again, from an economic point, we should do this. And that's another reason what we are saying to the, how to bring STI to this format of like prawn farming. We said Sri Lanka has just stagnated. We have added more pollution to the ground. We are not benefited as much as to the economy. And there should be a scientific and technology innovation intervention. And we have listed in this third column in the below, you will see some examples. And with a time frame, you should have a time frames and work on it. So there has to be a sustainably for to growth. We should infuse science and ensure innovation and move on. But there should be a roadmap. And I think clearly precision roadmap is very important with timeline conditions. So we know where we are and what we have to achieve at this time. And they should not be changed very much unless really, really right. I mean, like it's important to change. So that is a combination of something we said with nanotechnology when we started. It's time to bring to our resource-based economics with knowledge-based economics, and the sustainable blue economy depend on this extra knowledge. We remember ITI had products, award-winning products coming out of the ocean. University of Colombo has had, where even intellectual property litigation was looked at, but we played it in the wrong way in the sense of our regulations didn't support the research, unfortunately. And with the plant quarantine under the act. And so we can see we have to change quite a lot. If you have to benefit from research to an economic gain, we need to change most of the current procedures that we are having. And I'm not talking exploitation, I'm talking about sustainably and making to the national benefit, right? So this paradigm shift is necessary to bring knowledge. And the last comment, I don't know who can recognize the person. There is my last slide. With that, I'm just connecting to the Express Pearl. That's Fritz Haber, who's actually a German Jew. And in the First World War, the Germany had a significant debt to pay to the other countries because they violated the rights of the other countries and caused enough damage. And that one, he has a scientist, you know what he did to pay the debt of the Germany? He identified there's an opportunity of gold in the ocean. And then he started trying to extract gold from the ocean. And the idea to repay the debt of Germany after the First World War. And interestingly, that is a scenario that's still continuous, but with now some things like Delphia acidovirans, considered a rogue microbe. You can see in University of North Carolina and so on in USA, there are some like specific programs that have been doing for gold scavenging, biomineralization strategies with bugs in it, which is biotechnology. And that's a much more healthier or a more sustainable way of use of material, the stuff to extract. And it's now again happening. So Haber found, but the interesting thing is it's about 700 trillion worth of gold in seawater. Now, Professor Prashanti put in the calculation of how many trillions that was put in for the global economy and the sea. And this is just pure extract. The valuation of gold in sea is 700 trillion in today's terms. So that's multiple times of the current valuation of the ocean, right? Just imagine how central bank would be happy if our researchers can unleash some bugs and get some nuggets of gold. I'm pretty sure the change can be dramatic, right? We don't need mega change, but it could be done and it should be done. And I think there should be that happiness in research where we actually venture into some new areas and then try to challenge. This is just waiting for us with that 1,300 square kilometer stretch. We don't use this sort of thing, and it's time to do. And we may find our own bug to do that better, because this is not the only one, but this is considered kind of like the potentially very high value. So remember this with Express Pearl, something we did find was that if you look back in COVID times in last century, when that epidemic happened, the samples were preserved. And one sample that was preserved was used in 2020 to identify that it was the bird flu variant that caused the Spanish flu in 1919. The sample was preserved and available. What we find our sense, unfortunately, is preserving a sample in Sri Lanka, the next day it is gone, right? So there is a significant owner responsibility on the institutions and the science and so on, to understand the value of the purposes for which what we are doing and to contribute it. And if there is unknown, let's have this event. There's so much of learning that has yet to happen because we do not know the system of lithium. This is the worst case situation of a lithium battery container went on, exploded, fire, burned on sea. When mercury went onto the oceans on the Japan, it took 7 years for the first person to die. It didn't happen immediately. This is what is called environmental bioaccumulation and magnification. It took 7 years for the first patient to appear in the Minamata disease. That was just one chemical. With Express Pearl, as I said, we had the entire periodic table almost, which includes about 300 metric tons of electronics and electrical equipment, which most of the time it was like hidden as impersonal equipment. But the point is 300 metric tons of waste electrical, electronic equipment immediately. That's so much of rare earths and stuff like that now wandering around the stuff, right? So please, there's a lot of things for science and we have to learn from this. And with that thought, I will say that. So Blue Economy, Express Pearl, things to do. There's a lot of things to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.